Let's say you're in the woods and experiencing some kind of emergency situation with only 30 minutes or so to go until sundown, with temperatures hovering right around freezing. And you realize that, like it or not, you're going to be spending the night there with just the clothes you're wearing and maybe a knife. How would you stay warm? What kind of survival shelter would you try to make in such limited time? What about the wind chill and hypothermia? What if you even had someone with you, like a child whose survival is now depending on you? Well, we showed you one option in our last video, which is to build a den like the animals do. But what if you don't have the luxury, like we did in that demonstration, of coming across a fallen or leaning tree? What would happen if you only had the insulating materials we gathered in our last video, but no immediate options for a traditional type of shelter? Just the insulation. Is that enough to even make a difference? What kind of quick emergency shelter could you make for you and whoever is depending on you? These are questions we've spent most of our lives finding answers to, and based off of our own real-life experiences in sub-freezing icy conditions, we are 100% confident that what we're about to show you will keep you warm in these situations. Here's exactly what we would do. First and foremost, we need insulation. We're in a forest filled with hundreds of sword fern plants, which happen to be one of nature's greatest survival plants because of their ability to insulate and trap in your body heat. Not to mention, they're very water resistant and quick drying. So step one is to spend most of the remaining daylight we have left collecting live green sword ferns, and the more the better. Next, we want a nice pile of dry moss too. It doesn't have to be as big as the sword fern, but still we want so much that it'll at least be as long as our knees to our neck and several inches thick. Also, having some extra to stuff in our clothing will give us surprisingly effective insulation. Now we have ferns and we have moss, and if you remember from our last video, we couldn't pass up the chance to grab some long strips of cedar bark. We'll show you what we did with those in just a minute. We're always in the habit of learning what's possible in worst case scenarios. So in this demo, we're just going to make this pile right here out in the open with no framework above us so you can see what's possible. This light containment fence you see us working on here has no other purpose except to help hold our insulation together in one place and prevent it from spreading while we crawl in and out. We have to emphasize that if you're running out of daylight, this step isn't even completely necessary. It definitely helps, but it's not mandatory. We want a thick layer of ferns down first to make a barrier between us and the cold, moist ground. Again, you can't skimp on this layer. It's got to be at least 6 inches bare minimum, uncompressed. But of course, more is always better. Next, we'll add a thick, soft layer of dry moss. Not only will it make nice, comfortable bedding, but it does an incredible job of trapping in our body heat. We don't need as much moss as sword fern, but the more you have, the better. At least 3 to 4 inches uncompressed, and enough to span your entire upper body, even all the way down to your knees, minimum. And finally, we'll dump on every fern we've got left to pile on top of us where we're going to lay. This should be about 2/3 of our total pile right on top of us. 1 to 2 feet minimum on top, but again, if you have more, add more. Now, the first time I ever tried laying under one of these fern and moss piles on a freezing cold day, I admit I was skeptical, even knowing that my dad has spent his life learning and teaching this stuff. One time I asked him how long it would take to get warm under a shelter like this if I was shivering and cold, and he said, about the same amount of time it would take you to get warm by putting on a warm, thick coat. Well, after I crawled under this pile, I kept careful track of time and really monitored my body temperature and comfort level. The temperature outside was near freezing, and I'd been pretty cold for most of the day, even a bit shivery at times. After only about 2 to 3 minutes laying under this pile, I felt absolutely no discomfort from the cold.
Because I can already feel like I'm getting too warm.
I told you it would work.
I'm too hot. Like I'm about to start sweating. And I've only been in here for, what, 3 minutes or something?
Yeah, it's probably been 3 minutes.
Yeah, this is incredible.
Now, while I was under there, we decided to dump a couple of full water bottles on me because even though we wouldn't choose this shelter model in the middle of a downpour, we still wanted to see if I could stay dry at the bottom if we got a little rain. And I came out without a drop of water on me. And since we're on the topic of rain, just for education's sake, let's do a quick experiment using way more water and way less fern to see at what point water would reach the bottom of a sword fern pile. We're dumping over a half gallon of water on this piece of leather, which only had 10 inches of fern on top. When we finished, it was still mostly dry underneath with the exception of 2 drip spots. By comparison, our main shelter featured in this video had 2 feet of compressed ferns over us, so a good summary would be to conclude that even with only a sword fern roof, this type of shelter would be considered water resistant, but certainly not waterproof. But again, the point of this video was not to build a watertight shelter. It's to demonstrate the crazy amount of insulation and warmth possible from just using moss and sword fern. But wait, we can't forget about the bark we collected. We're going to lay it concave side up and overlap it with strips laid concave side down to help divert any rain we might get to the foot of our shelter, but also just to add weight to our pile and compress the ferns down on top of us, which will increase our body heat. Now, if we did have all day to build a shelter and some extra tools, sure, we'd go ahead and make some extra modifications to this simple little shelter. But again, that's not our point. The point is to show what could be done in an emergency situation with the sun going down, with little to no tools and without expending very much energy. Now, there's all kinds of elaborate and impressive shelter models and videos that use the term survival shelter. So the reason we call these emergency survival shelters is because you don't always have time to build something elaborate and impressive. And making the decision to do that in an emergency situation with the sun going down could be a life-threatening decision. So for this reason, we have to make the distinction between survival shelters and quick emergency survival shelters like we've shown here. Make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on so you don't miss the next bit of potentially life-saving info we've got coming up in our next shelter video. Also, don't hesitate to request a topic that you're passionate about because we love making content that you enjoy watching. We'll see you all in the next one.